welcome to the Transformational Podcast, a conversation between brothers about practical ways faith is impacting our lives. We invite you to join us on this journey as we are learning to let faith transform the way we live. We are glad you are with us today and look forward to sharing our journey with you. Now let's jump in. All right, well, welcome to the Transformational Podcast. We are so glad you're joining us. And you've got myself, the Marine from Maryland, Chris, the pastor from Paradise. Chris, I'm going to just tell you, I think we should maybe try to shoot for less than 50 minutes on our
That's a good idea,
on this
but
podcast.
I will say I didn't get bored. It was just longer. So,
No,
it just made me work out longer, which I'm not a real big fan of. So,
yeah. Oh, really? So
yeah.
I was running and I found it helpful because I didn't have to
Everywhere
transition
I went,
between.
I was running.
That's me all the time, man.
Over there. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to do 25 and 25. Did I tell you that? 25 and 25? Yeah, 25 miles a week and 25.
That's a really good idea. I mean, that's great. I'm going to do 25 and 25 feet a week. I'm
I
pretty
thought you
sure
were going to say 25 miles in 2025.
Oh.
And I mean, number of times you get chased, you're probably shooting about 25.
Get there.
You might get there. Yeah. Hey, what's up in your world? What's going on?
Man, we just getting stuff organized still at the house. Worked in the garage all morning. The fence is almost complete. Actually, the guy who's helping me, Chance, he listens to the podcast. So, what up, Chance? You're outside welding the caps on right now to the
Chance.
fence.
Chance, I'm so sorry that you have to bring this one along with you. Hey, you're like just the little bit more guy. You remember that story?
I told him that story. Yeah.
Just
a little more. Hey, listen, that fence is still tight today. Just so you know.
No, it pulled a post up out of the ground that was probably 50 feet deep.
I'm going to say they didn't bury that one low enough. So,
yeah. So what the story is, just for those who aren't tracking, we were building a barbed wire fence on our farm, and we're pulling the barbed wire tight. And I was like, yeah, that's good. And he and I both come from building barbed wire fences, so we're not like new to this. And I was like, that's good. He's not, just a little bit more. And so we a little more. And then I was like, no, that's good. That's really good. He's like, no, just a little more.
For the record, what were we using to pull it tight with? Do you remember?
Oh,
it wasn't your normal fence. Yeah, we weren't using the proper tools. So I was like, I think we could do a little bit more. But if we were using, a fence stretcher or whatever, I probably would have stopped earlier. But anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, bottom line is a little bit more. I think we popped the post up about a year after it was set. So you're doing a lot of work. Isn't it amazing how much work goes behind getting a house set up?
It does, but it's kind of fun to have projects here and there, so I enjoy it.
Yeah, but well, on this side of the house, this week has been the normal week in my world for V22, where several trips up to the Pentagon to talk to people of extremely high rank. Nothing unusual.
Nothing unusual.
Nothing unusual at all for what I do. But
Robert, I'm just gonna say, like, when you tell your stories to me about the people you're in the room with and the different number stars, it's just pretty cool to me, and I think it's cool just because of the way that God honors those who seek Him and those who will honor Him in their ways. He often elevates them, and I see that in your own life, and I love that. So I'm proud of you as a brother.
I appreciate that.
But also
thank you.
Excited to see God do stuff like that.
Yeah. So thank you. Well, I tell you, I got to see one of my great friends who does listen to the podcast in the Pentagon. Somebody of high position, and we were both passing in the hallway. She was doing her job, I was doing my job. At the time, we couldn't stop and talk, but we both looked at each other, and I just shook her hand real quick and walked on by. So it was great to see Ann there and chat with her or just that momentary connection. To know that there are a ton of people who love the Lord, follow Jesus, working at the highest levels in the Navy, in the Department of the Navy. And so that, to me, is always fun to have those moments of connection as I'm just kind of walking through. I mean, that's even cool. I managed to run into a friend, and we chatted about him and how God has him right where he should be, and he was just discussing that with his daughter at church. It was just fantastic. It was good to see that that's the way he approached his business. Yeah. So in order not to go 53 minutes,
We better dive in.
which it was good, let's
It
dive
was
in.
good.
Hebrews 11 is where we're at. Obviously, we're still there. This one, I think we're just going to attack this one and only verse, because I think there's enough here to talk about it. And it's Hebrews 11:29. It says, "It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the sea, as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned." So the story here is of the kind of the final phase of the Exodus, the final step away from Egypt, where God essentially gets them completely and honestly for a very long time broke free of the Egyptians. And we probably should go a little bit through the setup, but I
Yeah.
want to, before we get there, I want to hit this part of it, and it's this idea that um, when he took them through the Red Sea and the Egyptians tried to follow, I think it's interesting that the Lord actually pushed the Egyptians out after them at that time, because he essentially weakened that army, weakened that military leg, that military arm for at least like almost forever. Like it never was the
Yeah.
same. And it's fascinating because as the Israelites wandered around in the desert, as they started conquering the promised land, etc., as we'll read later on, they didn't even have to. That wasn't even Egypt wasn't even in play. Like he
Right. Yeah. No
basically said, "Hey,
tripled.
this potential future threat, nope, no longer a
Yeah.
potential threat." So it's a
Yeah.
fascinating for me as like a military guy. I look at this as, all right. So the Lord was like, "Hey, if I leave Egypt strong, which they were very strong at that point, then Israel might actually have to contend with them in the future."
So, Robert, here's just a little spiritual insert here. Is
Okay,
that
go for it.
when God delivers you from what once had you captured, He does it in such a way that your past no longer has to have power over you.
All right, say that one more time. Say it one more time. That was
That
good.
when God delivers you from what once has captured you, what once has held you
Yeah,
captive, He
yeah,
will do it in such a way that your past no longer has to have power over you. Now, your past no longer has to have power,
yeah.
meaning you can still submit yourself to its power. You can still return to Egypt, but it no longer can capture you and take you back.
Hey, let's talk about that, because that's diving in. That's where we're going to end up here with the
Yeah.
Egyptians.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, with the Israelites. So,
Yeah.
can you just for us capture the leading kind of like, okay, Moses is back. Moses and Aaron. So the boys are back in town.
Boys are
Eh,
back in town.
there you go. Thank you. I thought
All right,
I set that up.
yes, I'll kind of set it up. Basically, God tells Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, tell him let my people go." He says,
Yep.
"No." He says, "Let my people go, or else." He says, "Or else what?" There'll be some plagues, and so there were 10 plagues. There were water turns to blood. The Nile turned to blood. That's the main water source. Turned to blood.
Yep.
Then Pharaoh had his magicians do something similar. He was like, "You see, we can do that too." Then he made their came, and the next plague was frogs everywhere. There were frogs all over the place. And finally, Pharaoh was like, "Please get the frogs out of here." So he says, "If you'll get them out of here, I'll let your people go." That he gets them out of there. It doesn't happen. Then there were gnats everywhere. And
Gnats. Yeah.
gnats. Which, by the way, like, isn't that the worst? I remember playing
Oh my
sports and there's
gosh.
gnats on the field. They're in your
So bad.
eyes, they're in your mouth, they're in your nose. Like, it's
Yes.
the worst. And
They
so I
like
can
seem
only
to know how
imagine.
to go into like your nose at the
Yes.
most ridiculous or inopportune time.
And in your ears, like you're
Yeah, it's not good.
smashing.
I
Yeah,
couldn't
it's horrible.
imagine.
It's
Couldn't
gross.
imagine.
And then he basically said, "All right, make these go away, and we'll let your people go." And so And once again, he makes him go away. He doesn't let the people go. Then there were flies everywhere. The next plague, flies everywhere, which in Texas summer, there are flies everywhere. Sometimes I think we have a remnant of the plague. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just they're the worst. They get in your
Now this
truck.
is the
You're
first.
driving down the road and there's that fly in the truck. Like, I wonder how many accidents they have caused. But
Right, I know.
anyway,
You're like trying to swish it out the window. Have you ever done that? You're
yes,
swishing it out the window. Meanwhile, you're
you're
trying to keep it on the
swatting at
road.
it and you're driving.
Yeah. Hey, do
Anyway,
you realize this is the first plague though that the Israelites were separate from the Egyptians?
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
I
up until
didn't
this
say that.
point, everybody had to go through the blood. Everybody had to go through the frogs. Everybody had to go through the gnats.
The
Um,
canals.
but this is the first one where God basically demonstrates that his people are set apart. His people are different than the Egyptians. Now, I do wonder, I've always wondered, I guess you could say, um, if the reason why the Israelites had to go through the first three was because when I don't know if you remember, I was just reading it this week. Actually, it was in my morning time when the foreman that made bricks, they're getting beat up because they weren't making enough bricks because Pharaoh is ticked. And he's like, you're gonna build these bricks, and I'm not gonna give you anything to do it with.
Oh
You're
yeah,
gonna
no more
keep doing it.
straw. Yeah,
Yeah. So they come out
yeah,
and they actually like essentially curse Moses and Aaron saying, "Hey, you made us stink before Egypt. Like
yeah.
you shouldn't have ever done this." So they no longer have faith that God's going to break them free, and it makes me wonder if the Lord's like, "Hey, the first, I was going to be 10 plagues where you're set apart. The first three is
First
you're
two,
going to be a part of it."
yeah.
Yeah.
First three, we're gonna get your
Nothing
attention
tells
first.
us, yeah, nothing tells us that, but that's where my brain always kind of, I'm like, why
Yeah,
the first three?
yeah.
Why did they have to go through the Gnats? That would have totally
God
stunk.
counted to three. So I'm gonna give
Yeah,
you a
well, I
count of
guess he
three. Just kidding.
did. Well,
So
okay,
then
keep going.
after that was ridiculous. All
Yeah,
right,
it was
after the
ridiculous.
flies were the was the livestock where there's a plague against the livestock, but once again, none of the Israelites' livestock died. Um, and then after that was the boils on animals and people. Once again, Israelites are set apart; they're protected from this. All the time, all the while, these plagues happen, and Pharaoh goes, "All right, if you'll make it go away,
I'll let him go.
I let him go." And then he re, uh,
He even
goes
negotiates
back
at
on
one
this.
point, right? He says, "Hey, all right, here's the deal. I'll let you take
Just
just
the
the
men.
men."
Yep,
And then
yep,
he's like, Moses is like, "Absolutely not. We got to take everything." And he's
yep,
like, "Then I'm not doing it."
yep. And then it was boils on animals and people. Then it was a major hailstorm. Just
That's
destroyed all the
crazy.
crops. I mean, killed people. I mean, it was just
Yeah,
enormous
nuts.
hailstorm. Then there was locusts everywhere, which once again, if the crops weren't already destroyed, now it's destroyed. But it's not just in the fields; they're everywhere.
Yeah. Think
Once
about it.
again,
The
here in
Israelites.
Texas, we've had a taste of that before.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
And you walk down a sidewalk, Robert,
Yeah.
and they just start. I walked backwards down the sidewalk because I got tired of them hitting my face. I just figured I walk
I know what you
backwards
mean.
between the buildings at the church, and they would just hit you the whole way, and then you'll get one that latches on, and you get to the door, and you're like, all right, get all the
Yeah,
ones that
get these off.
I can't imagine living like that. But that was apparently what
But
happened
think
there.
about it again.
Worse.
At this point, the Israelites, for all of the things you're talking about, didn't have to go through any of it. Like,
Yep.
and they're in the land, so they're not separate. I mean, they're right there. They're in Goshen, in the land of Goshen, but it's just north of where the city of Ramesses and all the other, areas are. They are not far away,
Yep.
and they're not having to deal with any of this.
So after the hailstorm, there was locusts. After the locust, there was a 3-day blackout of the sun, which I can't imagine that. But it
I
was
mean,
just
what did that to me? So the only thing I have on memory on that one, like where it makes me kind of wonder, is when I was in my first and second deployment. In reality, we had these sandstorms that would come blowing in, and it would essentially. Now, this one says you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, so
yeah.
like I don't know how this one's pulled off, but it's as close in my brain as I get to it, where you're in the middle of the day and you really can't see more than like 10 feet in front of you. I mean, it kind of glows because the sand glows. So I do wonder on this because, again, the Israelites are not going through it. what is going on there? I mean, that is nuts.
It's the most epic solar eclipse of all time. A total eclipse of the heart for 3 days.
Yeah,
So
it's crazy. Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
so after the 3 day blackout of the sun, there was the final plague was the death of the firstborn, and we talked a little bit about this last time. Is
Yep.
that the Israelites were told to sprinkle the blood of a lamb above their door, and when the angel of death came, they would see the lamb and they would pass over that
Yep.
house. And so none of the Israelites' families were touched. In every other household, the firstborn of every animal and human died. And it was at that moment that Pharaoh said, "Get out. And by the way, everybody who's in Egypt, give them your jewelry, your gold, your fine
Well,
clothes."
the the way it is God tells Moses at the burning bush before he even gets there. He says, "I'm going to make you rich. I'm going to make your sons, your daughters, and everybody rich because everybody in Egypt is going to basically give you everything." And so when Moses says, "Hey, everybody, pack up tonight, and in the morning, ask all your neighbors for their stuff," is essentially what he's ask them for their stuff, and they're going to
Yeah.
willingly give it to you. And so I think part of it, right, is the neighbors are probably at this point are like, whatever you want. Like, do you
Yeah.
want that? I mean, you can have that because I'm done. Like, I need you to
Yeah.
go. Like, whatever you
Yeah.
want and get out of here. But yeah, so the Lord enriched them on their way out.
Yeah. So they left, man, with lots of drip. All right. That's what the kids are saying these days, Robert. And
I don't even know what that is. Is that
uh,
like jewelry? Is that like
ask
bling?
Annabelle. It's all of the above. It's
Annabelle
so
doesn't
they
know.
leave. I'm sure she does more
Okay.
than you know,
Okay.
more than you know.
Okay.
Anyway, but they leave and they head, and that's where we pick up. They head out towards the land that God promised to give them, but He doesn't take them directly there.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, Exodus 13 Verse
yeah,
17 says that when Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Thus, the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. And then Moses took the bones of Joseph, as we were talking about previously, because Joseph made the sons of Israel swear to do this. He said, God will certainly come to help you. And when he does, you must take my bones with you from this place. So, anyway, the Israelites basically went out and skipping ahead a little bit. By day, the Lord led them with a pillar of cloud, and by night, it was a pillar of fire. Crazy. That must have been
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Um, and then he led them from place to place. So to me, I've been in that area of the world. Personally, it is really hot, and when the sun is out, Chris, it's like icky hot. It's not a kind of hot that is even felt really in Texas in some ways. Um, and so I have personally seen this as the Lord was like, hang on, let me cover you with my shadow so that you're not baking in during the daytime, and let me give you a nightlight so that at night you at least know where you're going. You're walking. Maybe I have you stayed for the night, like if you need to get out, use the bathroom, come back, you're not
yeah.
tripping over things, right? Because now they're intense. They're on the move. They're mobile.
It's very intense to be out there. Um, Hey,
Well played.
Robert,
Well
can
played.
can I can I point out one thing that I just think is significant as we read this story? I think sometimes
Yeah.
we read this story what I like to call in the children's book version,
Okay.
where
Yeah.
we it all just goes real fast. The people, it says this in verse 40 of Exodus 12, the people of Israel had lived in Egypt for 430 years. Um,
Wow.
in fact, now here's what's interesting. It was on the last day of the 430th year that all the Lord's forces left the land. I think that's interesting, right?
The
Okay.
last day of
The last day,
430,
right?
which
On the dot.
corresponds to a prophecy.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
But here's why I say that. These are people who are leaving a land that's the only land they'd ever known. It's the only way of living they've ever known. We're not
Yeah,
talking
literally
about
nobody. Yeah.
like there's no one left alive who's going, well, we used to do it this way. No, this is literally the only way of life they know. And I think sometimes some people
Man,
stay
that's
in captivity because they don't know any other way of living. And God's calling us out of captivity, out of the way our parents did it, out of the way our parents' did it, out of the way. Like it's not a generational thing that we need to hold on to. We many times we need to leave. It's time for us to. God is calling us out of the land that we've been in captivity and into a new way of living. And I think the scary part, and we're going to see this here in a little bit, and the thing that causes us to look back so often is that that's the only way we know. And
yeah.
God's going, it's okay. I will show you a new way. But here's where we go. We want the new way and we want it clearly marked and clearly defined and we want it to be quick. But God takes them out and he doesn't even take them the fastest
He
way.
doesn't.
He says, I'm going to take you the long way around because you're not ready for what you're going to face in the meantime.
Yeah, he's
And
prepping
it's
them
yeah,
for
it's
sure.
the long way around. It's the journey to where he's taking us that prepares us to take the land that he has for us, to take the promise that he has for us. But he can't take us the shortest route because we won't get there. We won't be ready for it. Sorry, dude. That just hit me
No,
when I
it's
read
good.
that.
It
I was like,
preaches.
man, I think there's so many people who just look and go, well, that's just not the family I was raised in. None of these people were
Or
raised in the kind of family that would leave
yeah.
Egypt and go
Or
to
sometimes
a
God's calling us into, and I've seen this a couple times where God's calling us to do something different, right?
yeah.
But what He's calling us to do different comes with uncertainty,
Oh yeah.
and it comes with like the uncertainty of whether it's financial uncertainty or maybe it's status uncertainty or whatever, location uncertainty. It just comes with uncertainty, and man, it's kind of like hits. So like when I was in the fleet and I was, I was basically top of my game. I was headed to the top of my game in C-130s. I was the instructor of everything. I was going to be designated the instructor of everything. There, we call them weapons and tactics instructors. I was headed there. I had a
Wow.
class seat for that. And the Lord was like, "Hey, I want you to go to test pilot school." And I won't totally bore us with the converse or how that happened, but it was very clear. The Lord says, "Hey, I want you to go to test pilot school." This was honestly, a hard right turn for
Right.
where I was headed. I was headed to go be like a squadron CO and kind of move up inside the C-130 world and the whole 9 yards. And God's taking me off path. And what's fascinating, Chris, is that path, off path. Um, the only people who had ever gone before me had gotten out for the most part. So the people who go down that path have basically like they're not finished in their career, but it's kind of really that's been like the kind of the model for people in my path. Now, since then we have one or two of us, but for the most
Yeah.
part, it still stands pretty close that about 80% of us get out and go do something different.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
fascinating.
but partly because that path opens up a
It
world
opens
of
up a lot of different
opportunity.
doors.
Yeah.
Yep, a lot of
Yeah.
different opportunities. I didn't think I was smart enough for it. I didn't think I was good enough for the flying part of it. I didn't think I was the right person. I was like, Lord, what are you doing? And so I kind of fought him for like 2 months. Like, I'm not going to do this. So finally, one day I gave in. I was like, all right, Lord, if I'm going to do this, I need you to do these other things to help kind of pull this together. And I stepped off in that direction. And I look back and it just makes me think of this. I didn't want to leave that because, Chris, that was what I knew. I knew how to go be an operations officer. I knew how to be a C-130 pilot. I knew how I was so comfortable. And not just, Chris, I wasn't just like serving myself. I was serving the Lord in that.
Right. There's
Like I
nothing wrong with
wasn't,
what you're doing.
yeah,
No.
I wasn't, yeah, is God just, hey, I got something different for you. I want you
Which
to take a hard right here.
this is so good. And really, we probably will come back to this when we get to Joshua in a little bit,
Okay.
because he took you down the non-conventional path, right? And he said, "I've got a non-conventional way to do this." But what I love about it is when God does that, nobody can take credit for it and go, "Oh yeah, that's the way you do that. That's the way
Yeah,
you get
right.
there," right? You
Yeah.
look and go, yeah, this is the way God worked, and it was different, and it was out of the blue and out of the left, out of left field, and it's just it's one of those things that you look at and go, man, God shows up, and you're like,
Yeah. So I
but
think
you
that's the
have to
thing.
trust him, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the point. The point is, you had to be willing to go,
Yep.
okay, God, whatever this means, I'm willing to do it.
Yeah.
So
So anyway, if you're listening and you feel like the Lord's kind of calling you in a direction and it doesn't violate God's principles that He has written in the Word, it doesn't violate something that is what we're called to do by the Lord anyway. And then you maybe even seek the counsel. But be honest with you, Chris, I sought some counsel, and none of the counsel told me to go to test pilot school. Just to be real for a second, right? But
yeah,
I was certain that I felt the Lord's kind of call in that direction. If that's you right now and you're listening, what I'm telling you is you need to step out.
yeah,
You need to make the move.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, didn't take them through
But let
that.
me be clear
Yeah, go
with
ahead.
that. You had a clear decision to make. It's
Yeah.
not just so I guess I'm saying is, if God is telling you to quit what you're doing without telling you what's next, and it's
Yeah.
so clear, that's great. But if God hasn't given you the clear to do that, and you're just going, I'm really tired of my job, and so I think God's telling me to quit my job. I, I think sometimes part of the clear, what God calls us to do is to stay and do it differently, not necessarily go
Oh,
and
I
do
agree.
something different.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I want to say that because in ministry, a lot of times I hear people uh,
yeah.
you use God as an excuse to walk away from something, their frustration. And I think I would just say this: are you running from something, or are you running to something?
That's a
God
good
gave you
point.
something to run to. And now there are times when you're in a situation where there's things that are unethical, illegal,
Run,
or
run from that.
violate your conscience with God, violate what God has clearly told you to do or not do. If that's the case, run. God will
Yeah.
honor you. But other than that, man, I would just say, God, will you make clear my next step if it's not here, or if it's here, will you show me how to do it differently?
Yep. All right. So let's move because I do
Yeah,
want to
we got
get
to
to
keep
this
moving.
next
Yep.
part. Oh yeah, I
Yep.
want to get to the next part because in Exodus 14, the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. He said, "Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by uh, something between
Bahaharath.
Migdal." Yeah, camp in this one area. It's next to the sea, next to the Red Sea. Camp there along the shore, across from Baal Zephon. Said, and this is what God says. I love this. Then Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused. They're trapped in the wilderness. And once again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I've planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the
Now,
Israelites
Robert,
camped where they were told.
when you hear that as Moses, are you going, "Oh, thanks God, you're going to have the Egyptians come after me"? This sounds like fun. But I
Are
just,
you sure, Lord?
are you sure? This sounds. Is there a better way to do this, God?
Right? I know. And the Lord's setting something up. So basically, you get back over to Pharaoh, and the officials and everybody, they're realizing that their entire labor force
Yeah,
has now left.
they would have had
And
so many more pyramids. I'm just kidding. Just
stop.
kidding. Sorry.
Maybe cities, because it does say they built cities.
They
There's
did
no
build
doubt about that.
cities.
It's
Yes.
very clear that they built most of those cities through forced labor. But so Pharaoh realizes that they're gone, and he actually saddles up his 600 of his best chariots along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt. So it's kind of funny. I think we see 600 chariots, but we also miss it's the 600 chariots along with the rest of the chariots. He did it. He brought all of it.
Oh yeah.
He didn't.
Yeah.
So sometimes what a commander will do is he'll bring his main force and then leaves his reserves in the back. Nope. Pharaoh's like, we're bringing them all. Get
Yeah.
them all. Get my good stuff too. Make sure you get my good stuff. And so
Yeah.
he hardens the heart. Pharaoh chases them. And essentially, now what you have is they catch up to the people of Israel as they're camped near the shore. And as Pharaoh approached, this is verse 10, as the Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. Now, if you could imagine here for a second, I get it. These are like moms and dads. All right. So if
Mhm.
you really want to get at the heart of this, like I can easily throw a stone at them. You know, you've seen 10 things and God did all this stuff for you, but you turn around and you see the Egyptians coming and you like look and your whole family's there.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's got to be heavy.
Yeah.
And so, but in this case, they cried out to the Lord and they said to Moses, sorry, I laugh when I see this because not because it's not heavy, but because it is definitely a common theme as we listen about the Israelites as they kind of go through the desert. As they say,
Yeah.
Moses, why did you bring us out here in the desert to die? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? Like we could have just stayed there, is what they're saying. We said,
Yeah.
leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the man. Think about it. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that the heart so
What?
often when following Jesus doesn't get easy and we start going, why do I even do this? Like, why don't I just live like everyone else? Why don't I just go back to the old way? Because it was, now we are deceived in that moment thinking it was
Yeah.
easier back then. No, you were crying out to God. You were miserable and there was no hope
Yeah.
uh,
Because they
of a
said they
future,
were,
right?
yeah, it says God heard the cries of his people under the oppression of slavery in Israel. And so I'm going to read the next piece, but I do have a question for you because I know we've talked about this before. Moses said to the people, don't be afraid, just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. And so you mentioned something, Chris. You mentioned, and it kind of spurred this question, and I want to ask you: is sometimes we look at the adversity in our life and we think to ourselves, like, why am I even doing this? Why am I making myself a target for Satan?
Mhm.
Satan doesn't bother people who don't do anything. Like, wouldn't it just be easier to be a slave in Egypt?
Here's what's funny is that we don't recognize that the enemy is crushing us when we're not doing anything,
Right?
but it's a daily grind, right?
No
So
hope.
my counselor, Dr. Lamance, says that, hey, the enemy's coming after you either way. You just either operate with God's power and learn to live victoriously, or you just get crushed. But you have to choose. The enemy's not, his
Say that
desire is
again,
to
because
just,
I think that is key. That's critical because I have the same problem, Chris. A lot of times when Satan's come after me and things are kind of falling around me, I'm like, Lord, why am I even like
yeah,
why if I wasn't serving you, I'm now this is not right. It's a lie, right? It's a lie of the enemy. If I wasn't serving you, then I wouldn't be under this whatever it is that's going on.
yeah.
You name your thing. So say that again. The enemy's
The
coming after
enemy's
you.
coming after you no matter what. You
Yeah.
just get to choose whether you're going to live in the power of God and learn to live victoriously, or you can just live crushed and defeated. And the reality is a lot of times you don't even realize it, but where they left, it only destroyed them. They were serving the purposes of their enemy. And when we serve the purposes of our enemy, it ultimately destroys our life and leaves our lives void of any kind of meaning or purpose. God was taking them out of that into a place of promise. And so here's the other thing I would say is when the enemy comes after you, it doesn't mean God isn't working,
Yep.
and it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. When the enemy's coming after you, it means that God is about, it is a setup to see God come through. It is a
Yeah, yeah,
setup.
yeah.
Like it's one of those things you shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be worried. We get so fearful in our human side of the enemy, and we forget the God of the plagues, right? We forget the God of the who delivered. We forget the power that's already been displayed in our life and go, wait, wait, wait. We know God can do this. And so,
Yeah. Hey, did you notice in this verse, Chris, the thing that it says? It says, "I've planned this in order," like who he's displaying his glory to at this point. I think it's interesting. I don't think I've noticed it until we were just talking about it. It says, "I've planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army," and it says, "After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord."
yeah,
And he's not
yeah,
displaying his glory to the Israelites. The Israelites already know he's God.
yeah,
and what he's doing is he's using this opportunity to teach the Egyptians who is God. And
Yeah.
so it says, the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me?" I love this because, Moses basically goes to God, and God's like, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff, raise your hand over the sea, divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the." This is actually how I hear it in my head, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, as a matter of fact, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff, raise your hand over the sea, divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground.
Yeah.
I'll harden the hearts of the Egyptians. They'll charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his
Mhm.
chariots and charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt again will see my glory and know that I'm the Lord God." It's almost like Moses was supposed to know to raise his staff
I
over the
know. I
sea
know.
and part
For
the
real.
waters.
Now, here's the other part of that, Robert, is doing that. He had to risk feeling foolish.
Oh yeah. Think
Nobody
about
had
it.
ever seen anyone do that before, and he's over there, stand and watch God work for us. And he's going, "All right, God, you got to help me. You got to help
Yeah.
me." God says, "Come on, dude, just raise your hands over the water. Like, come
Yeah.
on." And at that point, he has to make that decision. Okay, this may be foolish, and everybody's watching, but God, you better show up. And he does it, and then I wonder if God, just to mess with him, delayed it for a second or something. No, but he splits the water open. God,
Yeah.
he responds. God responds to our obedience. God responds to our obedience. We often want God to go first, and God's saying, "I want you to obey first.
Yeah.
Come on." Just
Yeah.
he responds to our obedience. And it's when we obey that we position ourselves to see his power. Like disobedience rarely, if ever, leads to seeing God's power in a good way. All right. Obedience positions us to get to see God's power.
Yeah. So they basically go through the
So Robert,
middle.
let me
No, go
so
ahead.
this
Go ahead.
means to the people who get frustrated maybe with your spouse and go, my spouse will never. Hey, you obey
Yeah, it's none
and
of your
quit saying
business.
that your spouse will never. Okay?
Yep.
You obey, you do your part, and pray and ask that you would get to see God's power at work in their life.
Yeah.
That
Amen.
you can't sit there and disobey God and expect him to move. All right. I
Yep.
don't know. It maybe and I don't spouse came to mind just because of the season that we're in here in Valentine's season, but there's other things, kids and parenting and things like that. But
Yeah. I
there's
think
very
that's yeah.
practical ways that God's going, I want you to just do your part and
Yeah.
trust me to do mine. But if you won't do your part, you're not going to get to see me do mine.
Yeah, no, I agree, Chris. You're spot on. I think spouse is actually very, honestly, very appropriate. Not just because it's the season, because I see it not just only in my own life, but I see it in others, right? And so we see that. And so, in as we kind of like land this plane, I think it's interesting. They get on the other side, they walk through the dry ground, through the water. That must have been awesome. That must have been
Oh
epic.
yeah.
The Israelites, or the not Israelites, Egyptians chase after them. God twisted their wheels, is what it says here, making it difficult for the chariots to drive, which tells me that like they're going through here and they can't go straight. That's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It literally means they're like,
S turban.
I
S
know, and they're
turban.
like probably running into the walls of water, like, "Oh nope, go the other way. What is going
Yeah.
on?" And
Yep.
then as they get to the other side, the Lord says to Moses again, "Raise your hand over the sea again, then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians." And it's interesting to me. And it's as the sun began to rise. So this happened all night long. The waters rush in, it covers everybody. Moses essentially finishes it as he started it, and they end up getting done, and they end up singing a song of deliverance when it's all said and done. And to me, if you go back to Hebrews 11, it says it was by faith that the people of Israel not marched. By faith, people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. It would have actually been easy, Chris, after he's raising his arms and the Israelites see this dry ground through the middle of the sea to go, yeah, you go first, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I'll wait till
Yeah.
you're to the other side and then I'll go because it's not a small distance, and that is not a shallow. I mean, it's shallower than the rest of the area if the whoever the people historic folks got it right.
Yeah.
They know kind of where that is. But it is like I'm sure that the Israelites, when he said, "All right, go through the water," they're probably like looking behind him, like, "You first." "Oh, I'll follow you."
Well, yeah,
Everybody's
because
polite at that point, right? You go first.
he didn't take them into safety. He took them into more danger before they were in the safety. He was saying, "Go into the unknown to the seabed where if the water comes in, it's gonna crush you and drown you like it ended up doing the Egyptian army." Right?
Yeah,
So they had to be willing to continue to walk into danger, right?
yeah,
To escape it. God didn't deliver them from danger. He took them through it, I
yeah.
guess is my point. So
Yeah. So the faith of the Israelites, like we got to see a little bit of a progression through this podcast from these 10 plagues that got them free, broke them free from Egypt, took them out into the wilderness, didn't take them along the fast road because God doesn't do that with us, right? He needs to prepare us for where we're going. He sometimes then says, okay, I'm going to actually set you up in a situation to grow your faith. And when I grow your faith, you are going to essentially have to do something. You're going to be obedient, but you're going to do something that may feel uncertain. Maybe it's going to feel whatever. So, if you're listening right now and you're like, all right, I feel like God's calling me to do something kind of crazy. Definitely talk to a confidant. There's no reason why not to.
yeah,
But at the same time, your obedience is what Chris said, positions you to see God's power. And so I'll let you have final words because we are going to try to get done in less than 50 today.
that's right.
But
Hey,
it's been good.
here's what I'm saying. That I love about the story. God is calling you out of captivity into freedom.
Oh yeah,
Don't
amen.
don't stay where you are because it's familiar. Follow him to where real freedom is found.
Amen. Thank you for taking time to join us today. Our prayer is that you are encouraged in your own journey as you let faith transform the way you live. If you enjoyed hanging with us today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star review and sharing our podcast with others. We look forward to discussing what God is doing in our lives in our next episode.